Hello, everyone, and welcome to Chapter 12 on social psychology. Social psychology looks at how other people influence our thoughts, feelings, and behavior, including how we act in groups, how we judge others, and how we explain why people do what they do. Think about how you act with your friends versus at work, or how quickly you decide what kind of person someone is based on one moment. This chapter covers how we explain behavior, how attitudes form and change, and why people conform or obey or go along with things. We'll look at prejudice and discrimination, aggression and bullying, why people sometimes ask for help and sometimes stay silent, and what draws us towards certain people in relationships. By the end of the chapter, you should be able to tell the difference between a situational explanation and a personality judgment, describe cognitive dissonance, explain why people follow group pressure, describe how prejudice turns into action, and talk about what predicts aggression, helping, attraction, and long-term commitment. Have you ever decided how to act based on who else was there? Maybe you laughed at something you didn't think was funny because everyone else was laughing. Maybe you've stayed silent even though you knew something was wrong because you didn't want to draw attention to you. Or maybe the opposite. Maybe you've spoken up about something because you felt like you had to. Now, think about judgment. When you see a video of someone losing it in public, yelling at a cashier, getting physical, melting down, do you assume that's just a bad person? Or do you wonder what happened to them before someone hit record? Be honest with yourself about your first instinct. Now, I want you to think about a situation like high-profile cases in the news where people rush to form opinions about who is dangerous, who is innocent, whose behavior is suspicious, and whose behavior is normal. Those snap judgments are not neutral. They're shaped by race, neighborhood, clothing, stereotypes, and fear. This is a part of social psychology. We make fast decisions about other people, and sometimes we act on those decisions in ways that affect their safety. But what exactly is social psychology? Well, it looks at how people affect one another. It focuses on the power of the situation, how our thoughts, feelings, and behavior are shaped by the social contexts that we're in. The question asks, what has more influence in the moment, the person or the situation? We can look at this on two levels. We have intrapersonal topics, which are within one person, things like our emotions, attitudes, the self, and how we think about other people. Interpersonal topics are between people. So helping behaviors, aggression, prejudice and discrimination, attraction, and how groups interact with each other. When we see someone do something, we almost immediately tell a story about why they did it. Sometimes we blame the situation, like what was going on around them, what kind of pressure were they under, who was watching, and how stressed they were. Other times we blame the person. That's just how she is, or that's his personality. He's just like that with everyone. In social psychology, the view that our behavior is mostly shaped by what's happening around us in the moment is called situationism. The view that our behavior is mostly about who we are on the inside, so our traits, temperament, and typical style, is called dispositionism. You can feel how different those two things are. Picture someone cutting you off in traffic. You can go, wow, that guy is really selfish, which is dispositional. Or you can go, something must be going on and he's trying to get somewhere really fast, which is situational. Same behavior, but two completely different explanations for it. And which one you choose often affects how you treat the person afterwards. The fundamental attribution error is the tendency to explain someone else's behavior by saying it's because of who they are, their personality or character, and to ignore the situation they're in. So, for example, someone is short with you and the immediate conclusion is, oh, she's rude, instead of she must be overwhelmed and behind deadlines. The focus goes to the personal traits and not the circumstances. In a Quizmaster study, two people were randomly assigned roles. One person was the questioner and was allowed to write difficult trivia questions. The other person was the contestant and had to answer those questions. After watching, observers were asked who seemed more intelligent. They rated the questioner as more intelligent than the contestant, even though the questioner's role gave them an unfair advantage and the roles were randomly assigned. This shows how people ignore situational factors and assume differences just because of the person. People in individualistic cultures like the United States tend to explain behavior in terms of personality. That's just how she is, she's that kind of person. There's more focus on individual traits like independence and personal responsibility. Because of that, fundamental attribution error, like blaming the person and overlooking the situation, shows up a lot. People in more collectivistic cultures, like many East Asian and Latin American cultures, are more likely to consider the situation. There's more focus on relationships, context, roles, and obligations. So instead of stopping at he's rude, the explanation is more like he's under a lot of stress at work, he's responding to pressure, or the situation put him there. The situation gets more weight. Actor-observer bias is when you explain someone else's behavior as a reflection of who they are, but you explain your own behavior as a reaction to the situation you were in. You'll say, he's rude or she's dramatic when you're talking about someone else. When it's you doing the same thing, the story then becomes, I've been getting it from all sides at work today and I'm just done. Their behavior gets read as personality, your behavior gets explained as circumstance. In one study, men were asked why they liked their girlfriend. When talking about their own relationship, they gave situational reasons, things about what was happening between them, what the relationship was like. When they were asked about why another guy would like his girlfriend, they shifted and used personality explanations, like what kind of person he is and what kind of person she is. So your own choices get explained by context. Someone else's choices get explained by their character. Self-serving bias is the pattern where a person claims credit for good outcomes but blames the situation for bad outcomes. When something goes well, the explanation sounds internal. That happened because of my ability, my effort, or my work. When something goes badly, the explanation shifts to something external. That test was unfair or really hard, or the conditions weren't reasonable. Other people caused the problem. Psychologists call these explanations attributions, beliefs about what caused the result. Attributions can be described in terms of whether the cause is internal or external, stable or changeable, and controlled or not controllable. Self-serving bias protects self-esteem by describing success in a way that reflects well on the person and describing failure in a way that removes personal blame. The just world hypothesis is the belief that the world is basically fair, that people get what they deserve and deserve what they get. In that mindset, good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. People hold on to this because it feels safer. If the world is fair, then life is predictable and under control. It creates the sense that as long as I do the right things, I'll be okay. The problem is what happens when something bad happens to someone else. When someone is hurt, targeted, or struggling, a strong, just world belief pushes people to assume that person caused it somehow. Instead of looking at things like poverty, discrimination, or unsafe situations, the response becomes they just made bad choices, when that's not necessarily the case. A social role is a pattern of behavior that is expected of a person in a given setting or group. Student is a role, parent, employee, friend, partner, oldest sibling, supervisor, all roles. Each one comes with certain expectations for how a person should act, speak, and carry themselves. People typically don't have just one role. The same person can be a student, a parent, an employee, and a caregiver. And the behavior in each role is also not the same. The way someone talks to an instructor in class is not the same way that person talks to a younger sibling at home. That shift is based on what the role calls for. These roles are shaped by what the culture around us has agreed is normal for that role. The expectations aren't random, people learn them and they're shared. Because of that, behavior can change across situations, not because the person is being fake, but because different situations and settings are asking for different roles. A social norm is a group's expectations for what is appropriate and acceptable. Norms cover how people are supposed to behave, what they're supposed to talk about, how they're supposed to dress, how much emotion is okay to show, and what is considered to be respectful. A lot of stress in adolescence comes from trying to become independent while also trying to match those norms to avoid being pushed out socially. A script is a mental outline for how an event is supposed to go in a specific setting. For example, most people already know the script for walking into a classroom on the first day, or getting on an elevator, or sitting down in a restaurant. That script includes usually what happens, in what order, and what the expected behavior is. Scripts can be different across cultures, though, which is why behavior that seems normal in one place can be seen as rude, too informal, or too formal in another. These norms and scripts give people guidance on how to act without having to stop and think through every move in real time. The Stanford prison experiment was set up as a mock prison. College students were randomly assigned to play the role of either guard or prisoner. The goal was to see how people would behave in those roles. What happened was things got intense very quickly. The students assigned as guards started to harass and humiliate the students assigned as prisoners, and that behavior escalated in a way that became hostile and degrading. The students assigned as prisoners began showing signs of severe stress, anxiety, hopelessness, and emotional breakdowns. The study was supposed to run for 2 weeks, but it had to be stopped after 6 days because of how intense it became. The study is used to show how powerful social roles, social norms, and scripts can be. The guard role came with an expectation to be controlling and aggressive. The prisoner role came with an expectation to be obedient and powerless. People stepped into those expectations so quickly. The behavior in that fake prison also drew comparisons to real abuse of prisoners, which raised serious concerns about what can happen in environments where certain roles are allowed to act without accountability. If you are curious about learning more about this experiment, there is a link to the video that explains it more, both in the description and in the Canvas module. An attitude is a person's evaluation of something, a person, an idea, or an object. That evaluation can be positive, negative, or neutral. Attitudes are shaped by personal experience, by what we've been told, and by what we see rewarded or rejected in our environment. They can feel very automatic sometimes. Psychology breaks attitude into 3 parts. The affective component is how it feels emotionally, like this makes me angry, this makes me feel safe. The behavioral component is how it affects our behavior. So when I feel this way, here's how I act towards it. And the cognitive component is the beliefs and thoughts behind it. So here's what I think is true about this. When all 3 line up, the attitude tends to be very strong. But what happens when they don't line up? Cognitive dissonance is the mental discomfort that happens when a person holds 2 things together that don't match. There are a few ways that people try to reduce that discomfort. One option is changing the behavior to line up with the belief. Another option is changing the belief to fit the behavior, usually by downplaying the problem or explaining it away. The third option is adding a new thought that makes the 2 things feel more compatible. Only the conflicts that really threaten a person's sense of themselves tend to create strong dissonance. But when it does, it's powerful enough to motivate change. So take an example of smoking. So someone believes smoking is bad for my health, but that person still continues to smoke. That creates cognitive dissonance. To reduce it, the person might quit, so changing their behavior, or they might decide that the research is exaggerated, it's not that big of a deal, which is a change in the belief. Or they might add a new thought that makes it feel justified, like smoking helps manage my stress and keeps weight down, and stress and weight are also health concerns. The point is not that any of these explanations are medically correct. It's that the person is trying to get relief from the uncomfortable mental conflict. This discomfort can also show up physically. Dissonance isn't just an idea. People feel it in their body, especially when it threatens a positive view of themselves. Justification of effort is the idea that the harder someone works to get into something, the more they will value it afterwards. If joining a group requires a difficult or embarrassing initiation, people tend to report liking that group more than people who got in really easily. In research, students who had to go through a more intense or uncomfortable initiation to join a discussion group ended up rating the group as more interesting and worthwhile, even when the group itself wasn't impressive. The effort itself becomes part of the story. If I went through all of that to be here, it must be worth it, for example. This is one way people resolve dissonance. If the experience was unpleasant to get in, the mind leans toward defending it rather than admitting, I did all of that for something that wasn't even that good. Persuasion is the process of changing someone's attitude through communication. This is not only in advertising, it shows up in political messaging, public health messaging, social media, and even normal conversations where someone's trying to get an agreement. Any attempt at persuasion is trying to answer the question of what can I say or how can I present it so that the person shifts what they believe, how they feel, or what they're willing to do. Some persuasion goes straight for facts and logic, while other persuasion doesn't bother with facts at all and instead tries to create certain feelings. The elaboration likelihood model says persuasion can follow two main routes. The central route is logic-based. It uses evidence, data, quality of information. This route works best when the listener is motivated to think about the message and is willing to engage with the details. When someone is paying attention and cares about accuracy, this kind of persuasion tends to produce longer-lasting attitude changes. The peripheral route is more surface level. It relies on cues that create a positive association, things like confidence, attractiveness, status, or emotional tone. The actual content can be minimal. This works especially well when the listener is not deeply invested or doesn't want to think hard about it in the moment. This kind of persuasion can still be effective, but the attitude change is usually less stable over time. Both routes can work, but they work in different situations. A person who is analyzing a serious decision, like how to vote, whether to take a medication, or whether a claim is true, is more likely to respond to the central route. A person who is only half listening, scrolling, tired, or not personally impacted is more likely to be moved by the peripheral route, especially if the message comes with a positive emotion, familiar face, or confidence. This is why the same topic can be sold two different ways. One version will be, here are the facts and here's the data, and the other version will be like, look who else supports this, with tone, aesthetic, or credibility cues doing most of the work for it. The foot in the door technique is a persuasion strategy that starts with a small request and then follows with a larger request. After someone agrees to something small, they're more likely to agree to something much bigger that matches it. For example, a person might be asked to do something minor that feels easy and harmless, like sign something, put a small sticker somewhere, answer a short survey. Later, that original agreement gets used to open the door to a much larger ask, like donating money, volunteering time, or putting up a sign in public. The reasoning is, you're already the kind of person who supports this, and people generally want to stay consistent with how they've already acted. Conformity is adjusting behavior or answers to match a group, even when a person believes something different privately. Picture the line judgment display on the slide. If you knew the correct answer was C, but everyone in the room was confidently saying A, what would you say when it was your turn? Sit with that before you answer out loud. Most people think they'd hold the correct answer until they're actually in the room in the situation. The Ash effect is the influence of a group majority on an individual's judgment. In Ash's setup, one naive participant sat with Confederates who deliberately gave the wrong line length answer. Even on this easy task, 76% of participants went along with the wrong group at least once. A few details changed conformity a lot. Bigger majorities pushed conformity higher to a point. The moment a single person dissented, conformity dropped to near zero. Public answers increased conformity. Private answers made it easier to stick with what was correct, which is why votes for public office are private, to reduce pressure to match with the crowds. Normative social influence is about belonging. People align with the group to fit in, feel accepted, and avoid rejection. The behavior may not match private beliefs, but it keeps social peace. Informational social influence is about accuracy. In ambiguous situations, people treat the group as a source of reality. They seem to know, I'll follow that. This can be sensible when others truly have better information, and risky when the confident group is confidently wrong. Obedience is changing behavior to follow a direct order from an authority figure. In Milgram's research, participants believed they were delivering increasing electric shocks to a learner for wrong answers. Many continued past strong protest up to very high levels when instructed by the experimenter. The finding is uncomfortable and important. Ordinary people can carry out harmful actions when a legitimate authority accepts responsibility. The task escalates gradually, and social cues frame compliance as the correct role. There is a video link again in the description and in your Canvas module if you want to learn more and see more about the Milgram researchers. It's pretty interesting. Groupthink is when pressure for agreement shuts down real evaluation. Members suppress doubts, alternatives aren't seriously considered, and the group moves toward a decision that individuals might not endorse if they felt free to question. Signals that reduce groupthink include welcoming dissent, assigning a devil's advocate, and seeking outside input. Group polarization is the tendency for group discussion to push the average opinion toward a more extreme position. After talking only with like-minded people, cautious groups became more cautious, risk-tolerant groups became more risk-tolerant. Discussion doesn't always moderate, it often amplifies. Social facilitation is where performance can improve when other people are watching, mainly on well-learned or simple tasks. A practiced behavior becomes sharper with an audience. A difficult, unfamiliar task can get worse under the same spotlight. Social loafing is when individual effort can't be identified. People tend to exert less effort in a group than alone. Loafing drops when the task matters to the person, individual contributions are visible, the group is small, and when members feel responsible to one another. Prejudice shows up in everyday decisions, so who gets called back for jobs, who's believed in a classroom, who's pulled over and searched, whose pain is taken seriously in healthcare, whose apartment or who is shown an apartment, and who is welcomed in a neighborhood. Across these settings, it filters who is seen as competent, credible, safe, or deserving, shaping opportunity long before anyone has to say a word. Prejudice is an attitude, usually negative, toward someone based on group membership. A stereotype is a belief about a group, often an overgeneralization. Discrimination is the behavior that follows, unequal treatment because of that group membership. Now, these three connect, but they aren't identical. A person can hold a stereotype without acting on it, or discriminate by following a policy they didn't create. In real life, they often travel together. Belief leading to an attitude leading to a behavior. Racism includes both prejudice and discrimination based on race or ethnicity. It can be interpersonal, so how one person treats another, and institutional, so how rules or practices produce unequal outcomes across groups. Prejudice can be explicit, so openly endorsed, or implicit, automatic and outside of our awareness. Stereotypes simplify a complex world but create errors, especially when applied to individuals. Discrimination shows up in access to housing, jobs, healthcare, education, and daily interactions. Reducing prejudice usually means changing more than opinions. It involves examining where the stereotypes came from, how it's being reinforced, and what structures reward or punish certain behaviors. Ageism targets people because of age, often stereotyping older adults as less capable or younger people as irresponsible. Homophobia involves negative attitudes and discriminatory behavior towards people perceived as gay, lesbian, or bisexual, including exclusion, harassment, or violence. Sexism is prejudice and discrimination based on sex or gender. Common forms include assumptions about competence, pay inequity, and unequal standards for leadership or emotion. Stereotypes can be hostile, like women aren't good at, enter in thing here, or superficially positive in ways that still limit opportunity. Women should be protected from, enter thing here. Consequences show up in hiring, promotion, pay, safety, and everyday evaluation. Who was interrupted, credited, or believed. A self-fulfilling prophecy starts with an expression and then pulls behavior towards that expectation. In the case of Rosenthal and Jacobson, teachers were told a few randomly chosen children were intellectual bloomers. Without realizing it, teachers gave those students more attention, encouragement, and challenging work. And those students ended the year with bigger gains. The label helped create the outcome. Confirmation bias is the habit of seeking, noticing, and remembering information that fits an existing belief while overlooking disconfirming evidence. Once a label is in place, so strong student, problem kid, not leadership material, interactions get filtered so the label keeps looking true. In prejudice contexts, these two processes can lock in advantage or disadvantage. A biased expectation changes how people are treated, and selective attention keeps proving the original belief. An in-group is the group a person identifies with. An out-group is anyone labeled as not us. People tend to favor their in-group with more trust, more grace, and more resources, often without noticing it. Favoritism can be quiet, so who gets called on, who's believed, who gets the benefit of the doubt. Scapegoating happens when an out-group gets blamed for problems they didn't cause, especially during stress or uncertainty. It offers a simple target and a feeling of control while the real causes go unexamined. Aggression means behavior intended to harm, physically, verbally, or by damaging somebody's social standing. Psychologists often separate hostile aggression, like hot and anger-driven, from instrumental aggression, which is cold and goal-driven. It shows up under heat, crowding, alcohol, or when aggressive behavior is modeled and rewarded. It drops when people have regulation skills, clear norms against it, and the line. Frustration aggression theory proposes that when a goal is blocked, the resulting frustration creates a readiness for aggression. Aggression isn't guaranteed, though, but the likelihood rises, especially if there's aggressive cues like provocation or hostile signals, and weak norms against lashing out. Frustration can also be displaced onto safer or more available targets, like anger at a boss later taken out on a roommate, which spreads harm beyond the original source of the frustration. From an evolutionary view, some aggressive behaviors persist because they can secure resources, status, or protections. That doesn't mean hardwired destiny by any means. It means there are inherited tendencies that can be expressed more or less depending on context. Biologically, systems like the amygdala and reduced prefrontal control can raise reactivity. Hormones like higher testosterone and lower serotonin activity can shift thresholds. None of these act alone, though, so don't worry, you're not doomed to be aggressive. Learning and culture also shape how aggression is modeled, rewarded, or punished, which is why rates differ slightly across families, schools, teams, and communities. Bullying is repeated intentional harm in a relationship with a power imbalance. It can be physical, verbal, social, relational, like exclusion, rumors, reputation damage, and cyberbullying, like text, DMs, and posts. Cyberbullying extends the reach and duration. In anonymity, public pile-ons, and 24/7 access means the target can't get any distance or relief just by leaving school or work. Gender patterns, so boys are more often involved in direct physical aggression, and girls are more often involved in relational aggression and cyberbullying. Both genders use verbal aggression, and both can be targets. The effects on the targets tend to be increased anxiety and depressive symptoms, sleeping problems, headaches, stomach aches, fear and avoidance of settings, academic decline and being absent from school, loneliness, social withdrawal, and in severe or chronic cases, higher risks for self-harm. Protective factors include clear anti-bullying norms, trusted adults who respond consistently and appropriately, easy reporting paths, and peer support that interrupts the imbalance. The bystander effect is the drop in helping that happens when many people witness the same event. Responsibility diffuses across the crowd, and each person feels less personally responsible than if they were alone. Ambiguity compounds it. When the situation isn't clearly an emergency, people wait, people watch, and people mistake everyone else's hesitation for a sign that help isn't needed. Help increases when responsibility is made specific and the situation is clear. Effective moves can include identifying a person directly, so saying you in the blue jacket, assigning a concrete task like call 911, get the AED, and stating the need out loud. She needs medical attention now. Visibility, clear roles, and direct requests counter diffusion and help get action started. Pro-social behavior are actions intended to benefit another person, like helping, sharing, comforting, or protecting. Altruism is helping others with no obvious personal gain, sometimes at a real cost to the helper. Explanations for helping include empathy, so feeling with the person, social exchange or cost benefit thinking, and evolutionary routes like kin selection and reciprocal altruism. Helping is more likely when the need is clear, the help feels capable, there's empathy or similarity, there's a direct request, and recent models of helping are visible. Norms are really important here. Reciprocity and social responsibility are the norms when more helping is more likely. Mood can also nudge helping up, so a good mood or guilt up as a repair. Helping drops when costs feel high, roles are unclear, or others seem responsible. Relationships often start with proximity. Regular contact creates familiarity, and familiarity usually increases liking. Similarity, so with values, interests, pace, or background, make interactions smoother and more predictable, which helps connections stick. Reciprocity means people tend to respond to warmth with warmth and investment with investment. One-sided efforts stall closeness. Self-disclosure deepens intimacy when it's gradual and matched, sharing a little, getting a little bit back, and building trust over time. Oversharing too fast or not reciprocating can shut it down. When people talk about attraction, they usually mean looks and how someone comes across. For women, studies often find features like large eyes, high cheekbones, a narrower jawline, a slimmer build, and a lower waist to hip ratio as more attractive. For men, taller height, broader shoulders, and a narrower waist tend to get higher ratings as well. But it isn't just about appearance. Warmth, kindness, and social ease also get noticed, and so do signs of achievement or leadership. Put simply, people pay attention to how they feel around someone and how that person seems to carry themselves. There's also a pattern called the matching hypothesis, where partners often end up at roughly similar levels of overall desirability. Matching lowers early insecurity and makes it easier to meet each other's efforts. Sternberg describes love with three components. Intimacy is closeness, knowing each other, trust, feeling emotionally connected. Passion is the drive and attraction, so excitement, physical desire, and intensity. And commitment is the decision to maintain the relationship, showing up, keeping agreements, planning a future together. Different relationships emphasize these pieces differently, and the balance can shift over time. Early on, passion may be high while intimacy is still building. Long-term stability leans more on intimacy and commitment. Couples can strengthen a weak piece on purpose by building shared routines for intimacy, protecting time and novelty for passion, and making clear choices about commitment. Consummate love includes all three pieces at once: intimacy, passion, and commitment. When it's working, it feels balanced, connected, alive, and stable. It isn't a permanent state by default. If one piece fades out, the form shifts. High intimacy and commitment becomes compassionate. Passion and commitment without much intimacy feels fatuous, and intimacy and passion without commitment looks romantic. Couples can protect consummate love by actively tending to each piece and not assuming it just runs on autopilot. Social exchange frames relationships as ongoing cost-benefit tracking. People notice rewards like support, enjoyment, and security, and they notice the costs like conflict, time, and stress, and compare the balance to what they expect from a relationship. Satisfaction rises when rewards outweigh costs and feel fair. Commitment strengthens when there's investment to protect and no clearly better alternative. Healthy pairs don't aim for zero cost, they keep the exchange feeling worthwhile and adjust when it doesn't. Social psychology gives you language to notice when situations, roles, and group pressures are steering behavior, and to slow down quick judgments. Use this to pause before judging, weigh the situation alongside the person, and notice when roles, norms, and groups are steering behavior. That awareness lets you correct for bias, choose better influences, and act more deliberately with other people.